Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name is Mark Jones, and I'm your host for this event. This is the Space&Co Comm.Unity series of virtual events. We've had some fantastic feedback, so it's great if you're joining us again. Thanks and welcome back. If you're new, today we've got a really exciting conversation about the future of the workplace, and it's going to be an interactive event, which means that we are going to involve you as we go along. So expect a couple of polls as we go through the conversation. Also, we want to involve you by way of a Q&A at the end. So we're going to, I'll introduce a panel in just a moment, but we will be getting your feedback. And so I think that's a really important thing to note straight out of the gate. Now, why do we do these? Well, we want to give you inspiration and tools to help you in your personal and professional lives. These series of events have been designed for you as Space&Co members and also friends. And so we do hope that they are able to inspire you and give you those tools, as I mentioned. Now, without any further ado, let me introduce my fellow panelists for our conversation today. First, we have Space&Co's National Director, Shey Hooper. Great to see you again.
You too, Mark. Thank you.
And also we have Mark Mitchell, another Mark, which is always great to have. We're going to be, I think, are you Mark 1 today?
Who knows?
Okay,
I thought you were Mark 1, but anyway.
Yeah, okay. Well, he's the Workplace Director at EY. So clearly a great person to speak about the future of the workplace and a great brand. Many of you will know EY. So they're our two panelists today, and myself, of course. I'll try and let you guys do most of the talking. We're going to talk today about, as I said, the future of the workplace and doing business in disruptive times. And Shey, I'm going to throw to you first because it's an interesting week to be talking about this topic, given the shutdown in Melbourne. So what's going on for Space&Co and actually GPT? So the owners are your benevolent.
Yeah. So just to explain the connection, perhaps. Right. So Space&Co is obviously the business that we work for as delivering flexible workspace, but we're part of a much bigger company called the GPT Group. And yeah, I thought it would be useful just to reflect a little bit on the GPT workforce response right now, because we do have a large contingency of workers who are based in Melbourne. And I think at the moment for them, there's no doubt the shutdown is disheartening. And I think the lockdown, they only sort of crept out a little bit and then they've been pulled back in. And I'm really mindful for that. And I think as a member of the GPT community in Sydney, it's really being conscious of how do they continue to deliver in their roles in a way? How do we keep them engaged? How do we support them and be empathetic to the circumstances that they're in? So I'm very cognizant of that as we talk about the workplace and how we help build up their confidence when the time is to be able to come back through the doors and welcome them into an office again.
Mark, what about you? So EY is quite progressive when it comes to the workplace and looking after people. But what's it like in Melbourne at the moment?
Well, I guess Melbourne's been a little bit different for us because, again, we've gone into the second phase of the lockdown, I guess. And probably what's a little bit harder for our people is that they're seeing some of their colleagues who aren't in lockdown, our New Zealand colleagues who it's a post-COVID or pre-COVID world again, and then others which are sort of going through these different cycles. So I think it's just being aware and conscious of sort of that piece is important. But I think the other piece is the support of the technology has been great for us. And I think that's one of the areas that we've really been able to maximise. I think everyone's probably starting to see a few little chinks in that armour around, say, Teams fatigue and a few of those things. I think probably everyone's on a Teams meeting every 5 minutes. So yeah, but look, I think it's just hopefully this one works and then we can start to get back to that sort of new normal and get the buzz back in.
Great.
Well, so I think for both your organisations and also for myself, this is a very pointy discussion. I mean, this is really where the rubber hits the road, because when we talk about teams, when we talk about where we go and where we work, suddenly everything sort of feels to me hyper real, right? And so I was actually inspired. I read an EY blog post on the topic of the future of the workplace. And by the way, that's just what came up in the Google search. So, it wasn't just being on brand, Mark. But this article made a really interesting point that I think we can all reflect on, is that we are in the middle of a health crisis at the moment, but we're also facing another issue, which is almost a trust crisis. So how can we build confidence in our teams, and how can we make sure that organizations are trusted from an employee perspective? It's not to say that they're not trusted right now, but do I have a sense that my organization is backing me? Are they making the right decisions in the workplace? Are they supporting me at home? We've heard stories of many people being supplied PPE gear, for example. So Mark, given I'm just referencing, your own organization, what's your take on that? So how do we as leaders think about supporting employees in the best possible way?
Well, I think EY's approach was very much a people-based approach, which made me quite proud actually working for EY, because it was focused on that. So we probably went a little early, pulling people out of our properties and sending them home. We wanted to make sure, or sending them remotely, wanted to make sure that the systems are working, make sure that everything was doing what it needed to do. But the second piece was that we wanted people out so that they could get used to what their new world was going to be like for 6 weeks or longer, or as it turns out. So the key piece for us in that whole thing was that we wanted to communicate quite factually to them, but also we wanted to make sure that we were quite direct around what we were doing. So rather than being ambiguous in our messaging, and this is coming out of the whole face mask piece is a really good example of it'd be good if you could wear one. We were getting quite prescriptive around what you should be doing. And I think people probably welcomed that for the most part. I mean, there's always a small minority who, reflect their own view on things. But I think that was the key piece, was providing that. The other thing is part of our work.
Just jump in. How was it received? So, because I think the key learning here is that you were quite direct and clear. Well, as opposed to a suggestion, right? So how did that come across?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think actually it was welcomed really, really well. And when we surveyed our people, one of the questions was, how did you feel our response went and all the rest of it? And we scored really, really well and fairly high there as well. I think the other piece is that a part of our workforce does work on client sites. They've got to go off and do things like that. So we were very willing to provide gear to them, right down to said, if you want to wear gloves and masks and goggles, we'll do it, and here's how to do it. Interestingly, there's a way to put on a mask. I wasn't aware of that. So we've actually put in that sort of stuff. So very, very people-focused response, I think, which was the key win for us in many ways in that regard.
Over at GPT and Space&Co, this concept of people first is an interesting dynamic. I mean, you're people first in the sense of you're catering for members, right? But how would you describe your comms? Like, what was the approach that you guys have been taking?
It was still, if I think locally now at a Space&Co level, I think our response is always very people focused. So we have a very customer centric approach. And in circumstances such as the COVID disruption, we really did extend ourselves to immediately take the role of not only their provider of a workplace, but effectively their HR department. So we acted on behalf of the SMEs throughout our venues to say, well, we need to make sure that their workplace is ready and we've got everything in place. So exactly the same as Mark, I think, in terms of clarity and consistency with messaging, and efficiency in terms of getting the messages out there and building the confidence that we're being guided by the right principles. So we really, really stuck very true to guidelines coming out from Safe Work Australia, and very thoroughly, I believe, put control measures across our venues to ensure that when our member community was ready to come back, we were absolutely ready to welcome them there. So our venues remained open and accessible, but we respected the regulations and the choices that different companies were making, but very much in partnership to say, when you come back, we've got all these things in place, be it PPE for them or social distancing and so forth. So I feel, definitely a people-led approach.
Well, what's interesting about that, I know that you've got an HR background. How important has the HR director or equivalent become in not only your own organisation, but all organisations? It seems like there's almost like an additional layer of responsibility and pressure on the HR director to kind of get it right. Yeah.
Oh, look, I was talking to Mark about this previously. I think that the HR hat is it's a part of my DNA. So. And I think it serves me brilliantly for the leadership I can give to Space&Co, because the employee experience and the customer experience are completely merged there. So I'm acting on behalf of other companies' employees and really thinking about how I can support them to deliver a safe workplace for their teams. And so I think in what I'm seeing at an industry level and with organisations, their response through this period of time it's where culture shines. And I think it's where that really people-led approach to guide decisions around what's the right thing for our people. And if you're guided by that, I think 99% of the time, you're going to make the right choice.
I want to know where you guys are working. So we're going to throw up the first of our polls just now. And it's an interesting one. So we want to know, and you should see this coming up on your screen in a moment if it hasn't already. What's the location? Where are you at? Are you exclusively in the office? Is it a combo of remote and in office? Or is it exclusively remote? So as that comes up, let's run through the panel. I'll start with myself, actually. So I've actually just started coming 4 days in, 1 day at home, sometimes 3 days, depending on how I feel. That's my experience, because I wanted the focus time.
Yes.
And actually, we're in the studio here. It's a lot of light, so I actually enjoyed getting out of the house. What about you, Mark? Where are you at?
Yeah, look, I've been mixing it up a little bit. I've probably been working from home a fair bit more than I used to. I'm a bit of a people person. I like to be in the office, like to see what's going on, and like many people, was a pretty avid traveller as part of my role. So I think I've been working from home, which is working for me for the most part, because we've got great technology. I'm using my fireplace as a sit to stand, and that's working really, really well.
Not just to keep warm.
Yeah, I haven't actually gone to the physio too many times. So, no, I think the technology piece has been able to support that. But I have been going in a little bit more. EY's been pretty amazing, because we've obviously kept our spaces open for essential services and critical and skeleton staff and things like that. And we're starting to open those up a little bit more now. But what we've done is we've re-leveraged what is quite a large car parking piece that we've got. We've got a lot of car parking, because just inherently that's the way our business works. So
what does that mean? There's no one working in the car park?
No. But I can. So I've now got a little app, and so I can just book into the car park, go in, it pops open the gate, I can go and tells me where to park.
Yeah.
So it means I don't have that burden of getting on public transport, which I know for some people is got its own set of challenges. So bit of hybrid at the moment, but enjoying getting back to sort of seeing some of the team. And
What about you, Shey?
Yes, I'm very much in a hybrid as well. So I mix it up between continuing to work from home and transferring into the office, probably more weighted towards the office, given that we have site responsibilities. I have teams who are managing sites. So I feel it's important for me to be present and supporting them in terms of how we continue to observe and ensure that our spaces are right and ready for our members to return. And GPT, the technology enabled us to work remotely very easily. So it was accessible, it was there. And similar to yourself, Mark, car parking was made available for those of us with site responsibilities, so that if we were needing to come in when we were in full lockdown, we were able to have safe choices in terms of how we travelled into work.
Yeah, no, I think, sorry, just on that, it's the safe choice piece, I think, that's made a big impact to our people, is giving those safe choice options.
Yeah, I've got to say that was actually the trigger for me to get a mask, was the concept of public transport.
Yes.
And it's not, it's actually more driven by behaviour, because people kind of, generally speaking, don't observe the rules, right? So I think when you're confronted by that, that's an interesting thing. So look, so we'll see how you're going on the polls there in just a moment. But it strikes me that in the context of this, in this response, oh, hang on, I was about to lead on, but let's have a look here. It's just come through. So here's some interesting poll results. Remote is now up to 50%. So we're still half of the audience here is working
and is that
remotely.
Exclusively remote?
So, and then we have about, and the numbers are not going to work because they're being updated in real time here, but let's call it 15% in the office, 38% or so with a mix.
Okay.
So actually our panel here is not representative, right? We are the mix. And it seems like there's still a lot of remote working going on. Yeah, I actually came across an interesting story yesterday. If you recall back to the SARS epidemic, going back, particularly how it impacted many countries across Asia Pacific, a lot of those countries actually got used to it as a thing that comes and goes. So I wonder how you're starting to approach this from a decision-making leadership perspective, because I think there's a mindset that this is going to go away and then we're going to just maybe have a hybrid experience or a preference one way or the other. But when in fact, maybe we need to start thinking long term that this is a new reality. We're actually going to need to be sort of fluid in terms of where we work. What are your thoughts about that?
I think we're absolutely in a new reality, and we're kidding ourselves if we're going to go back. As much as it saddens me to say that, I think that is the reality. I think the other piece is that if we look at just our New Zealand portfolio as an example, we're in a post-COVID world, everything's back to normal, give or take, flights and all the rest of it. But we're still really struggling in some of our bigger offices to get anywhere near the numbers that we were seeing before that. So I think the mindset generally is, because this has dragged on, because of the risk of it continuing to drag on, especially with what's happening in Melbourne, potentially what's happening in Sydney, I think people have turned their minds a little differently. The other telling piece, I think, is that all of a sudden we've been trying for years to convince people that you could probably work a little differently. As it turns out, you can actually work a little differently, substantially differently. You don't have to spend an hour getting up, getting dressed, transporting into it, then starting your work. And as it turns out, that sort of works 2 or 3 days a week, and then 1 or 2 days a week go in. So, yeah, interesting, I think.
So let's change tack a little and talk about decision-making as leaders. And we've kind of started to touch on this, but, in the past, if you think about many HR decisions and that idea about, whether or not you can be working at home, it seems like we've actually moved into a different style of leadership that seems to be more collaborative. I'm wondering, from your own experiences, how are you as members of executive teams that make collective decisions, how are you changing the way you make those decisions? You've got the input from the government, but then you've also got an employee and a member base to consider. What's going on there? How do you think about decision making?
Shall I lead in?
Kick it off.
Well, I think when we first entered into the crisis that was COVID, one thing I would say is decision making became thick and fast. So it probably was more hierarchical initially, because you just had to start making decisions, and literally we were writing response plans as we were responding. But alongside that, what we did do is we consciously brought the team together more regularly through the week, such that we could convey information, because things were changing so rapidly. So we could quickly give the messaging, and we had forums set to do that. So that would sort of be the initial crisis response plan. And then from there, I guess at a team level for me, and it would be great for Mark to reflect probably on an EY corporate level, but from a team level for me, once we kind of moved into a different phase of the crisis management, and I still think that we're still in the crisis management, then we really did look at a more collaborative style. So we've got you've got to continue to stay abreast of what's happening from a regulations perspective and restrictions. And then there is, so I've got a small management team. We come together and we overlay our interpretation of that. GPT has their own crisis management framework, who push down an interpretation and a response to us. We then overlay, what does that mean from a member base? And then we manage communications down through into our member community. Very prescriptive communication. So we very much, consistent, and that clarity and consistency is just forever the guiding principle there.
So one of the things that changed the most then is the speed the frequency of your meetings.
I think so, yes. We definitely had to step up. So we already had catch-ups and things that were happening through normal BAU.
Yeah.
But as we know, BAU disappeared.
Yeah.
And then we realised those normal forums were not frequent enough. We needed shorter, more frequent communication channels that were locked in. My team are already remote, so we're spread across multiple venues. So actually moving to a virtual space wasn't that dissimilar to what we were already doing. But just, turning the right technology on, getting the right people, knowing what does this mean and what do you need to do and making sure I'm giving clear direction such that they felt comfortable and that their well-being was being considered as much as the venue that they were caring for.
Yeah. Workplace director.
I think that
how does that work?
The key thing for us is we have a virtualized team as well. So that was the one. The salient points for us were short, sharp communication. So we were getting together, quite a large group of us, once a day for 30 minutes. We ran sort of a crisis clock analogy on it. So everyone sort of had a 5-minute slot. We covered off all of the key pieces. And I think that's important because the messaging was changing. The situation was so fluid. The government was doing their directives on television, and people were almost immediately going, so what are we doing in response to that? So I think that was the first part. The second part is we sort of got into this a little bit more normalizing state now, where we've been able to just try and sort of get our offices back open, get people starting to come back in. But because we've got this challenge where, we're lucky if we're getting up to 10% back in, it's then how are we doing? And then we've got this whole future piece, which has been saying, right, well, now that things really are significantly changing, there's a lot of pressure. So it's quite a large group that's been formed internally, and it's being driven from both a people and a real estate lens and an operational lens, just to sort of see what we can do around that. Because people are starting to look for different things when they come in now. And I think that's going to be the fundamental shift. Are they coming in to do focus work? Well, no, it turns out they can do that remotely. So what are they coming in for? So they're coming in to collaborate. They're coming in to, network, have a coffee, hug it out, all of those sort of traditional things. Because people need people, right, to some level. So, it's how do we then morph that sort of workplace to become something that's a lot more akin to that? And we were well down that journey already in a number of our sites, which is great. Like we had cafes, we were starting to really sort of break out those areas. But we have a bit like Space&Co, we've got polar opposites around working. Like we've got focused workers right through to hanging from the jungle gym, screaming, yelling at each other in some of our more tech-based, stuff, which is great fun. But it's an opposite to the suit-wearing calculators.
People swinging around in offices, I kind of want to work there. I don't know what it looks like. But look, so you're both, and I would also reflect our experience too. We were already a hybrid kind of work style anyway, so it was pretty easy, I guess, physically to make a decision to stay at home. But I think what's been important for us has been increasing the frequency of virtual meetings and staying connected in that. That's been really important for us. But I kind of want to put you both on the spot because we didn't rehearse this bit. But I want to know, what did you get wrong? Or perhaps what have you learnt, right? Because you both, it sounds like great examples. I can imagine people going, yeah, but surely there was something that you've learnt along the way that wasn't quite right. To what extent are you willing to take a risk?
What did we get wrong? I mean, I think we could still be getting stuff wrong. I think because we're still in there. I feel like we were agile in our response.
Yeah.
And I think, gosh, I'm sure there's things we got wrong.
Do you want me to jump in?
You go, and I'll think. Yes.
We got a few things wrong. I think the first thing we thought is that people may want to return quite quickly. And we surveyed and we got told it was probably around about 10%. So we're like, oh, okay. Then we looked at social distancing and went, well, how the hell are we going to get all these people into the building and up?
Yep.
So the funnel was the lift.
Yep.
If you can only put one person in a lift, how are we going to get hundreds of people sort of up and down? And so then how do we plan for that volume coming in? Well, what we do is we be very restrictive. We say you can come in, do what you got to do, then go out. But you can't come and go. You've got to have slots and time. So we got super process driven, but it turned out that there's just no volume. So we didn't need to. So we had to relax that pretty quickly.
So in other words, you over-engineered it.
Well, I think so. And I've got a large team who can do that sort of stuff really, really well. I mean, we had a bunch of actuaries who pivoted the lift performance. It was crazy.
Oh, they had a great time.
Yeah, exactly. So it was interesting from that point of view, but that I think that we probably got that a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
And we got the fact that we needed people to adjust to manage some of our expectations, but they're already displaced enough, so they don't want to. You want to really soften it.
Yeah.
And we've got a great sort of comms lead, and she's been very focused on the message needs to stay absolutely focused. We don't need to over communicate. We don't want to fatigue people with over communication. So let's not keep changing things. Let's just sort of let it organically be.
Well, that does make me think that, in our response, you're quite not dissimilar to what you've said, Mark, is that we we were responsive and agile in what I call the COVID control measures. So the procedural response about how do we ready the space for people's return? How do we ensure the physical health and safety? You can get very deep into that procedural space, and it is then looking up and realising that this disruption's actually quite sustained. And whilst the immediate sort of safe response is important, what does it mean longer term, and what is the business response to the changing role of the workplace and the office, and an assumption around how people will or won't return. So, perhaps the speed by which we started to put our head back up out of the crisis and look over the horizon to say, actually, what is this going to mean?
So interestingly enough, Pip here has sent through a question. So thanks for that. She says, do you think that larger firms and co-working groups with multiple leases and sites might look to decentralise their larger CBD office footprints to a more front and regional model in the coming months or years to move with the new and trending work norms? Interesting one.
Yeah, look, I think from our point of view, that's a definite consideration. If you look at the fact that people may not want to travel the larger distances because they don't have to do focused work anymore.
Yep.
But they may not want to do it at home. Their domestic situation may not suit it. They may have kids, families, whatever, disruptions, a whole bunch of things, right?
Focus.
So they want to be able to go somewhere to do it, but they don't necessarily want to go to the big central pot. So I think it's a really valid piece. In Sydney alone, we've got sort of 4 sites already inherently in sort of how we work, and we've got a 5th one coming online. So it will be interesting to see. And whilst I say we've got 5 sites, they're not geographically particularly spread. It's more we've picked them up through acquisitions and things. So I think, we'll probably have to consider where they geographically sit. And part of our future of work consideration is absolutely sitting there and the sort of hub and spoke and all of those types of pieces. Good question.
It's an interesting one.
I think that from the customer conversations that I've been having, I definitely anticipate that there is a growing consideration for adopting some sort of hub and spoke model, or recognising that the workforce is distributed and it's not just going to collapse back to the way it was. So, and the big feedback that's coming through surveys that are done nationally and globally is that people have loved not having the commute. So they've loved not having it, and now they're concerned about the safety of it. So facilitating that in a more permanent solution in the future, whereby you've still got a centralised headquarter in perhaps a CBD location, but supported in metro areas, does seem like, it's still yet to be seen, but it is definitely being strongly considered by the corporates that we're speaking with.
Okay.
And I think the challenge to that will be the culture piece, right? Because, and I'm not a culture expert by any stretch of the imagination. We've got some really good people in our organisation who focus on that. But I suspect that culturally people will want to connect. So how do we get them? And it won't just be once a month or whatever. So if you've got all disparate sites, how does that sort of come together as one?
Well, I do want to talk a bit more about the physical workspace planning side of things, and we're going to throw up a poll in a moment to that point. I want to get your input ahead of our conversation on this topic. So the poll will be, if you're interested in working exclusively remotely, how interested are you in returning to the office? So the choice will be, are you interested in coming back? Are you neutral on this subject, or are you uninterested? And to that point, this question of safety, interestingly enough, I think is going to be one of the big drivers, right? So in a way that we've never really thought about it before. I mean, just, circumstantially, you get a cold once a year, for example, and we used to brush it off. Now we're like, someone's got a sniffle and you're like, hang on a minute.
Yes. Someone coughs and everyone looks. Yeah.
I've actually been going cough. No, it's just I'm clearing my throat. I promise.
Sorry, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, this because we're going through a potential second wave, like we're obviously looking at the second wave in Melbourne at the moment and potentially in Sydney, I think the fear factor then exponentially has gone up, because it's not come and now gone or going. it's hanging around. So I think the whole vaccine piece is the only thing that's really going to solve that fear for many is once it's, if and when hopefully that occurs. I think that's probably the more important piece around that. I think the other one is whenever I sort of traveled in a lot of the Asian countries, for example, people wore masks, but that mask was a sign of I'm sick.
Yes.
Whereas we're suggesting people wear a mask to protect themselves. So there's a bit of a confused message for someone like me who's used to being in that type of environment. Like, are you sick, not sick, So I'd be interested to see how that particular one pans out, because I think that's all those perceptions. And then just on the mask piece, obviously you want mask numbers to go up before you mandate it, because then there's only one person not wearing the mask and they sort of then feel they probably should. So yeah, interesting how long that will take to develop before that safety net starts to come in where people feel a bit happier to transit.
What other changes do you think really need to happen or will happen in the workplace, physically speaking? Like, so for example, we've got sanitisation, stations everywhere. What else?
I think the changes, from a design perspective, I think the changes could be quite fast. So I think if you look at an asset level, there is, a push. There was already a big piece of work happening around smart buildings. So I think that becomes even more important to be able to have a means to get into the building with minimal contact. I think there's already, tremendous initiatives happening across sustainability and wellness of asset towers. And I think so the trends that were already emerging, I think they've only been accelerated in that regard. So I think it's important as owners of property that we're continuing to pursue and look at those initiatives to create asset safeness, and that helps to build confidence for the occupiers. And then from a workplace perspective, obviously, I think what we're seeing in terms of heightened sanitation and cleaning, I believe that's standard now. That's the new normal. And I think making those procedures much more visible. People want to see and know that it's happening, and they want to be able to control their space and bring that wellness element themselves. So I think those things will remain. I don't want to comment on the health side of it in terms of the virus and the eradication of the virus, but I feel that we need to look at how we bring ourselves back to the new normal in a society where the virus will continue to exist.
Yes.
So we still go out in the sun even though we can get skin cancer. So, but we've learned how to protect ourselves against that and mitigate the risk. So whilst at the moment I know that we've got exponential numbers climbing up, and so we're still in the crisis, I think that even with the vaccine and however far away that is, it's how do we manage society and how do we support our teams and our workforces to be able to come back into society in the right way, knowing that there is always going to be a risk now that this virus exists.
Well, we got the survey results, the survey poll numbers are in, and this is interesting too. So remembering we ask how interested are you to return to the office? People who are uninterested in returning to the office, a big fat 0. Right. So that's an interesting one. Neutral is 18% and interested is 82%. So there's a lot of interest. And I wanted to pick up on a word you mentioned in passing there. You said confidence. And I think this is a confidence game. It's can I see, feel, hear, touch things in my office environment that will give me that confidence. And I think this is a long-term game. So we've also got a question here from Paul that says, talking about these short-term strategies, what will be the long-term strategies you think we need to be thinking about? So Mark, maybe you can pick this up because, you mentioned a number of sites. How do you build confidence in teams over the long term? Let's just start with that.
Well, I think we've got a long way to go in this piece where everyone's working super quickly, but I think ultimately we need to see, we need some time just to see how things sort of pan out. And it's sort of that chocolate, milk moment. Like, what are people going to want to go back to that's comforting? Like the childhood sort of pieces, you tend to regress back to what's comfortable. So I think we haven't seen what's comfortable yet. And then that then dictates what tolerance is of comfort, I feel. So as far as the future goes, I think definitely working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday is for many businesses fairly well out the window anyway, but I think we're definitely there. Coming into work, I think will be much smaller populations of people who come to just work, but they will still exist. So we have to provide for that. I think the collaborative piece will come, but I think the cultural piece and the connection to learning, development, networking, building, those sort of things is the unknown yet that we have to really focus on, okay? Because how do I learn about a deal, as an example? I learn from what I hear. I can't just schedule a meeting with Shey or Mark to say, can I have a chat with this for 30 minutes because your team is already full. But if I bang into you in the cafe, I can have a quick conversation with you. So I think that focus is definitely there. And our organisation was probably fairly well down that road in a number of our sites, but in our thinking. So I think that will progress even further. But I think that the future has to be probably a more campus-led set of spaces, a bit like universities where you're going to have to learn, but at the same time you're working on a project together or a thesis or whatever it is, but you're also coming together.
What else do you think about when it comes to long-term strategies? So the physical office spaces, you know, the time that we commit, the lease lengths, how many people we fit in these spaces. There's a lot of big things people are wrestling with right now, right?
Biggest decisions in our group, I think that we've probably had to make for a long time. And there's a lot of lenses and eyes on you for those decisions.
Yeah.
So reduction of net portfolio, absolutely. Get those square meters down. Get those square meters doing what they need to do, as opposed to having acres of desks which won't be used, turn it into acres of collaboration. It might get used a bit better. The cost obviously is significant. So yeah, there's some pretty big ones.
Yeah.
In the 20 odd years that I've been sort of working in initially facilities management, then into sort of real estate, and now more into sort of the workplace greater. Biggest challenge I've had, busiest I've worked, and I've worked pretty hard in some of the jobs, but yeah, you know what I mean? I think there's a lot of fluidity in that piece.
Yeah, and I think the key word here is flexibility, just to be on point with Space&Co, right? Because you want to be in a space that has that accommodates the unknowns and the desire to come and go. Because if we're expecting pandemics to come and go, don't want them to, but imagine that we start getting into that mindset, not only is my work behavior needing that flexibility, focus time, team time, not in the office time, that the environment itself actually has to really physically accommodate that. And so,
Teams is a good one too, right? Because we use Teams in our organisation. So those Teams-enabled rooms as a concept for us is going to be a focus.
Teams-enabled, you mean the Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, or Zoom or whatever. But you're going to need the ability to still collaborate like we are right now today while we're all remote working, but in a more structured environment. So that technology piece is going to be a big one for us.
And actually, as a side point, it's been interesting to note that any organisation that's involved in connecting people are the ones that are doing really well, right? I mean, the Zooms et al, right? If you look at their stock prices and the amount of money, anybody in the business of digital connection is really doing quite well. So that's almost like a tangential thing to this office, but it's actually key, right? Because we can't have that office flexibility without the tech piece.
No,
right?
And I think the digital, like the virtual workspace and the physical workspace, they're going to continue now. So it's how do we operate a company and keep people together with both of those worlds? It used to be the person who was remote working was the odd one out, whereas now we've normalised that, right? It's a level playing field, and everyone from the C-suite through the whole organisation have now experienced the highs and lows of working remotely and relying on digital connection and flexibility.
And all in 6 months, by the way.
Yeah, I mean,
such an amazing time frame.
And within a matter of days, in most cases, it was like, you've got to start taking your laptop home because it may be that within the next 24 hours, we're going to say you're not coming back. Yeah. And so I think that you do need to pause and reflect on how adaptable the workforce has been within your own organisation, within globally, because we know that the reports consistently are that businesses have continued to operate productivity has been sustained. I had an interview with a customer yesterday who said that their productivity measures have indicated they've actually improved since they've gone working from home for a particular part of the organisation, which was actually a call centre functionality. And they're still trying to work out how that's come about. But there's no doubt that we've got to be grateful for how adaptable the workforce has been, and the leadership that they've been shown, and the trust that organisations have had to instill to say, we trust that you're still going to get your job done. And guess what? People have.
Yes.
They're still delivering, and they've managed that not just in a little trial controlled circumstance. They've managed it in a live crisis, where they've also got homeschooling and perhaps a genuine concern for their own health. Like, I think we do have to stop and be thankful to ourselves and our teams for how well we've managed through that.
Well, I think that'd be a perfect segue to talk about culture, which is something that we haven't, we've kind of touched on, I should say, but I'm interested to know what impacts the workplace culture, this is being impacted, right? So it's interesting that there's more articles talking about the fact that we're getting actually over working at home. And I wonder how that sentiment of I don't want to be here, and we saw that in the poll, right? Which is I am not interested, 100% or 0% people not interested in coming back, right? So that there's actually a sentiment out there, if I'm to sort of read the room of it's like a lingering disquiet.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and as I said earlier, there's a bit of water to go under the bridge, and so jumping too quickly is going to be hard, I think, because you may end up having to wind back a little bit. We've just done a second survey, and we're just waiting internally, and we're just waiting for those results to come out. But it will be interesting to see what that change in sentiment is. We surveyed very early on, and this is, now people going, I can or can't or don't want to, or so that will be very interesting.
What about the generations? We should talk about how different generations are dealing with this, right? So Gen Ys, I mean, at the risk of them being yet, whipped again, but I think there's actually an interesting way of looking at this in terms of expectations of younger people in the workforce versus perhaps older who are more fixed in their minds about what going to the office should be like. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it brings back to that rationale around the ability to learn from others. And I think for your younger generations, the physical workspace creates learning opportunities just naturally more easily. And so replicating that in a virtual or digital sense is a challenge. And certainly my experience has been going to remote working is that my communication and collaboration and connection with my teams was heightened, but you do lose contact with other parts of the business that you're not naturally engaging with every day.
Yes.
Because those bump-in moments and those informal connections and overhearing, you once you're off the call, you don't have any of that.
Yeah.
And so the generational overlay on that, I think, is real, and it's not to be disregarded by organisations, as you say. With all the trends, you've got to be cautious not to jump to what could be a new world too soon, and risk losing how you would normally embed the learning opportunities and support across different generations.
Yeah, and look, I echo that because we sell people. We don't have a widget. So absolutely. So our people skills are the key skill that we sell. So the learning of that skill through osmosis, through formal learning, and all of those are critical to our ability to continue to sort of deliver. Yeah. And you can't do that in a fully isolated environment, in my view, without there being some disconnects around the peripheral noise that you need to help form some of your views on things.
Well, speaking of team, a shout out to Kate, who's at 580 George. Apparently there's a group viewing and, in a socially distant, appropriate way, evidently. So a shout out to those guys. I'm sure they're cheering you on, right? Is that what's going on?
Well, that would be at our Space&Co venue at 580 George Street.
Yeah.
So what we've seen in Sydney is we have seen growing confidence. So people are returning to the office, which has been great.
Yeah.
You start to get that energy back.
Yeah.
And so, I do believe they've come together to watch this. So hi to everyone back at the office.
You got to look at them down there.
Yeah. So hi everyone back at the office. So it is nice to start to bring that community back together.
Yeah.
We've worked really hard to look at how we can deliver that through a virtual means. But actually, there's nothing better than getting the people back together and having that interaction. And that's what our members thrive on, is the interaction with each other and the exposure to other teams.
Yeah.
So great to hear that it's starting to happen again.
Look, it's a bit of a cliche. We talk about teams as being like my family or my work family, but really we spend so much time at work. And I think this is a key thing, right? So when we are together, it's always good, well, at least in my experience, right? If you've got great workmates being together, there's an energy there that you talk about. And there's an overlay here too. I really, really believe in this in terms of mental health, in terms of, you can pick up very quickly on the signs from your team members. They're doing well, not doing well. How are you feeling? What's going on for you? How can I help? Right? That sort of stuff is part of what it means to be human, in the sense of very quickly sense that I could step in and help somebody. Harder to do that in a digital world. So I think, as we try to be more flexible, how do we, it's almost like, can you replicate that stuff in a digital world? You'd have to be very good on a camera to pick it up, right?
I definitely think that's where limitations come in, because there's a lot of non-verbal cues that you pick up on the well-being of your team and the people around you. And it is difficult to establish that. It relies on a real honesty and truth to be established, because it all comes down to the communication. And within our team, we've established a communication style and some tips and tricks over the virtual tools to be able to express how we're feeling. So we give ourselves a rating out of 5, but that relied on our team really trusting each other. So particularly if you're a new team and you're just in that forming stage, it's very much more difficult to be so raw in your response.
I think we had a funny anecdote. It was a stand-up moment. So I think it was the newsreader special. Everyone was looking great on camera, had their shirt on and all the rest of it. I was like, okay, now everyone needs to stand up, because, who's in their boardies and thongs, and, it was just little things like that. And that's the only way you can really get a gauge on what their mental state may be, because you can scan around a room, or you can see someone's body language, how they dress, different things like that.
So what's worked really well for both of you in that context? Like, what are some takeaways? And I'll give you a couple of things. Look, I think we might have fallen off the wagon a little bit, but we've got a culture here where we do the squat o'clock at 3 o'clock. Everyone, joins a Zoom call and we do some squats. That's a lot of fun. We've done some stuff around, how we meet together as a team and encouraging one another. We've got little back channels on Hangouts, and so there's lots of sort of energy floating around in our team. Interested, what have you done to kind of keep the energy going, keep that kind of important team spirit?
It was interesting, because I was on our CMT, which was particularly hard. They're a crisis management team, so there was sort of 9 of us, and it blew out a little bit, as the crisis got bigger. But we were making very serious decisions. We were having to do things, and that group was amazing because we tried to keep it light. So there was lots of laughter about what you're wearing, have you done your hair, and all the rest of it. And then you're cracking into making these quite big decisions for the business, because the CMT was effectively running the firm for a number of weeks. So I think that's really, really important. I think the second piece around it is trying to, as leaders, keep things a little jovial, put the joke in, let's not get too serious about stuff. It's not a good show. We all know it, okay? So let's not just keep focusing on that.
Yes.
Let's focus on, there are some weird silver linings that have come out of this, right? Your local cafe is really busy and you can walk the dog down there. You couldn't do that potentially before because you're too busy driving to work or sitting on the bus or whatever. I think try and keep it a bit uplifted and slightly positive, I think, has worked really well for us.
I would echo what Mark's saying. I think for us, we've almost said we've celebrated when we find a silver lining. So we are looking for let's turn this around. What's in our control? How can we make this a glass half full moment? So really consciously looking at how can we make the most out of this moment rather than just going into the depths of the crisis. And part of that as well is celebrating still the business wins and the agility that we've been able to demonstrate in terms of, looking at our business and understanding how do we turn the flexible into even more flexible? Yeah. Like how do we and challenging ourselves with new projects and forcing ourselves to think over the horizon. So actually, because the BAU that we were doing that we loved, a lot of that's stopped. And you found yourself now in this new world where the business work that you're doing is not as personally satisfying because you're in that crisis. So actually looking at how can we still get those targets that we're heading for, how can we push ourselves and strive to actually deliver even more flexibility that our customers are after, and then looking back and go, wow, we've actually developed 4 or 5 new products because of this, and we've done really well. So it's also looking at new ways to measure business success.
Yeah. And just a last comment on the social aspects, yes. Right? That builds its own set of bonds, because I remember we were having a joke on one of our calls about what cocktail you're drinking or what are you making tonight and stuff like that. But you're seeing into people's lives a different side that you probably didn't necessarily see before. So I think in a lot of ways that's brought this, especially with my teams, together
yes.
At a slightly different level, because we are spread right across 2 countries, Australia and New Zealand. So sort of just seeing what goes on in their domestic life and the dog and, all this stuff.
That's what your lounge room looks like.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of, it's quite good.
Yeah, great. Well, look, we are nearly out of time. So if you've got any questions for the panel, I do encourage you to do that straight away. I wanted to acknowledge a couple of questions that have come through as well, which I think in part we've answered already. But thank you, Lucas was asking, do you think with less people commuting into the workplace or the office, will more businesses look at more flexible office arrangements? I think we spoke about that. I think the answer is yes. But I think maybe just how flexible, what would your sense be in terms of what kind of asks do you reckon businesses will be putting out there?
Well, I think the first one is the elephant in the room is the lease tail and CapEx, because that really restricts how agile and quickly you can go.
That'll be a big one,
for an organisation like us. The beauty is if you're members of things like Space&Co, which we are, that gives you an infinite flexibility that you don't have in ours. So I think that's probably one of the key ones for us.
There's always a trade-off though, because you want more flexibility, but then you also need the security to know that we're going to invest in this property, and then you've got uncertainty there. So by not having
uncertainty is the right word, because uncertainty breeds fear. And confusion. And so we need to get our fear down a bit. We need to get our confusion a little bit into order, and then we can start to focus a little bit more. So moving too quickly may actually end up not being the right decision.
You've still got to do the survey, be data driven in terms of your response. And I think I'm definitely hearing that flexibility is going to be even more important, and in many different ways. So at an individual level, as an employee in an organisation, flexibility, yes, in how they work and where they work and at what time they work, all of those things. And then right through to, I think, the real estate solutions that we can offer to our occupiers. We've got to have flexibility of choice. And at the moment, GPT is positioned well in that they've got the traditional office solution, you've got smaller suite solutions, and then you've got flexible working solutions.
Right.
And what we're actually looking at is stretching that even more to say, well, what other flexible offerings can we make available?
Yep.
And even within Space&Co, we've got a piece of work that we're doing, and internally we call it flexing the flex. So it's diversifying the flexibility even further.
Okay.
Without even moving walls and chairs and desks, how can we continue to adapt to the demand that's already changed as a result of COVID?
Yeah, got it.
So,
well,
flexibility.
So Blake asks a question about this scenario and what is the capacity for co-working spaces to provide this, we're looking at hub and spoke model and, efficiently cater for a disaggregated model. So almost, if I was to rephrase that question, it's like you could get really busy. How are you going to cope with the influx of demand? It could be a good problem to have.
Yeah, Well, we are anticipating it could be a great problem to have. I think that we're positioned really well to be able to deliver the hub and spoke model, which is continually being hypothesised as a very likely outcome of this disruption, which is where you see one scenario of that could be that you've got your core leasing arrangement, so your traditional lease arrangement providing your headquarters in as your hub, and that could remain in your CBD area. And then you push out, say, to Parramatta, for example, which is where we're expanding to, and that's where you may have your spoke. And that could be accommodated within a flexible workspace solution rather than, so it gives you that ability to be able to be more agile here and move those around as required.
Yeah, got it. And then part B, if you like, of Blake's question was that how we manage the health issues with shared deals and spaces. So I think, that's I guess it's a functional thing, right?
Yeah. And I think we're already managing that really well.
Yeah. I was going to say our space that we've got in Melbourne is somewhat segregated, which I think works particularly well for that.
Yeah. So private office spaces. And
so well, it's not so, but there's a visual delineation. There's a few other, and I think. Yeah. I
think that I feel that we're already managing that really well. Most of our spaces are very much geared towards private office space within a shared floor. So, and we've, very stringent about how external parties move on and off the floor. So I feel from a control measure perspective, we've catered for that well.
Great. Well, look, we're going to start to wrap up now because there's a few minutes to go and you probably have to run off to your next virtual meeting or team meeting or who knows what. But I really wanted to, I think on behalf of the whole team here, thank you for attending this event. And could you please give a big virtual clap to our two presenters, Mark and Shey. It's been great to have you talk about this important topic today. And if you want more information on EY or Space&Co, of course, you know how to search things on the internet. I won't give you the URLs for that. The other thing I'll say is that we do have a poll, or I should say a survey coming up in just a moment. So please take a moment to do that for us. We want to continue to improve these events. And lastly, again, thank you for being part of this. We look forward to your feedback. Thank you for being so interactive and responsive. It's been great to have the polls and everything coming through here. So a fantastic time. I hope you've taken some lessons. For me, the key is going to be all about flexibility and how we continue to encourage one another onwards into what is shaping up to be a new normal, if you like, around being adaptable to change. So it's a really interesting time. So once again, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and we'll see you next time.